My name is Camille Hart. I'm 30 years old, and I work as an electrician with Union Local 11 here in Los Angeles. I live in a small apartment near the Venice boardwalk, close enough to hear the waves hit the shore and smell the salt in the morning air. It's a quiet, simple life, one I built with my own hands. But that morning, my phone buzzed, and simplicity vanished. It was a text from my mother. "This year, just your sister's family," she wrote. "Ava's bringing her boyfriend home to meet everyone. She doesn't want you there. Your blue-collar job would embarrass her." I read the message twice, then a third time, feeling the sting settle somewhere deep inside my chest. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply replied, "Enjoy." Yet, as I set my phone down, something sparked inside me, a steady current I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to sit alone in my apartment this Christmas, pretending it didn't hurt. What my parents and Ava didn't know was that for the past few years, I'd been quietly building something of my own, a $5.3 million beach house in Malibu, on Carbon Beach, every outlet, every light switch wired by my hands. I called it my table, a place where no one would ever feel small for the work they do. And this year, I would open its doors to everyone they'd ignored, everyone who'd ever been pushed aside in the name of family perfection. Tell me, have you ever been made to feel ashamed of what you do for a living? If you have, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from, so I'll know I'm not alone in this. I grew up in Anaheim, California, in a modest single-story house with beige walls and a neatly trimmed lawn my father took pride in. To anyone looking from the outside, we looked like the picture of a happy suburban family. But inside, everything revolved around one name: Ava. My little sister was the family's golden girl, the sun around which we all orbited. She was the cheer captain, the straight-A student who took AP classes, the pre-law girl my parents bragged about at every neighborhood barbecue. People used to say, "Your sister's going places." They never asked where I was going. I wasn't the polished kind. I was the kid who spent afternoons in the garage with Grandpa Ray, taking apart old radios just to see how the music got out. The smell of solder and sawdust was my childhood perfume. Grandpa used to say, "Electricity is just organized lightning, kiddo. You can learn to control storms if you pay attention." I believed him. While Ava practiced her cheers under perfect sunlight, I sat cross-legged on the cold cement floor, hands blackened with grease, feeling alive each time a broken light flickered back on. Our differences were harmless at first until they became a ranking system. My mother loved to remind me that book smart was better than manual labor. My father would joke in front of guests, "Camille can fix anything, just don't ask her to use a pen." They thought they were being funny. But every laugh carved a little deeper into me. I still remember Christmas when I was 14. The tree stood tall in the corner, covered in glass ornaments that sparkled like tiny stars. My parents made us wait until everyone was ready before opening presents, their cameras already poised to catch Ava's smile. She tore open her first gift, a Tiffany necklace, dainty and silver, her initials engraved on the charm. Mom kissed her cheek, beaming. "You deserve it, sweetheart. You've made us proud." When my turn came, I reached for the smallest box under the tree, my name written in rushed handwriting. Inside was a $10 Starbucks gift card, taped to a folded note. "Don't make a mess in the living room this year." I forced a grin and said thanks. The room went quiet for a moment, then the attention shifted back to Ava, who was already posing for pictures. I remember the lights from the tree reflecting in her necklace, warm, perfect, unreachable. That night, when everyone went to bed, I sat on the stairs and stared at those blinking lights. They looked close enough to touch, yet somehow always out of reach. Every Christmas after that followed the same rhythm. Ava's successes were treated like national holidays, mine were housekeeping notes. When she got accepted into an academic camp, Mom baked cookies for the entire neighborhood to celebrate. When I won second place in a local science fair with a homemade circuit board, Dad said, "That's nice, but maybe you should try a real academic competition next year." I'm OD5. At dinner parties, the introductions never changed. "This is Camille, Ava's sister," Mom would say, with that light, careless tone that turned me into an accessory. People would smile politely, say, "You must be so proud of your sister," and I'd nod because I didn't know what else to do. Even now, I can still hear that phrase like an echo stuck inside my head, Ava's sister. It was never Camille Hart. Just a title, an afterthought. The worst memory came the summer I turned 15. My parents planned a weekend trip to Santa Monica to celebrate Ava's cheer team winning regionals. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks: the ocean, the carnival lights, the smell of fried dough from the pier. The night before we left, Mom walked into my room and said matter-of-factly, "You'll stay with Grandpa this weekend. We only booked one hotel room and Ava needs her space before the competition." I tried to hide my disappointment, but as the door closed, I caught a faint whiff of her perfume mixed with sea salt, the smell of somewhere I wasn't allowed to go. That weekend, I helped Grandpa install a ceiling fan in the kitchen. He noticed I was quiet and said, "You're thinking too hard again." I told him I just wished I could see the ocean. He smiled, handed me a small switch, and said, "Someday, you'll build your own view, Camille. And when you do, don't wait for anyone's permission to stand in it." I didn't know then how much those words would shape my life. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped trying to compete with Ava. I let her have the spotlight, the applause, the admiration. I learned to find beauty in smaller victories, the buzz of a fixed outlet, the click of a working light. But every time the holidays rolled around and I saw that Christmas tree glow through the front window, I still felt like that 14-year-old girl staring at the unreachable lights. I could almost hear the waves crashing in the distance from that Santa Monica trip I never got to take, carrying the scent of salt and longing. Back then, I didn't know that someday the ocean would be mine to look at every morning. I didn't know I'd turn wire and current into the foundation of my life. All I knew was that love in our house was measured in achievements, and mine never made the cut. It took years to learn that the electricity running through me, the quiet, unseen work, was just as powerful as any spotlight. But at 14, all I felt was the hum of something I couldn't yet name. The steady, growing realization that I was never going to be seen until I built something they couldn't ignore. By the time I turned 17, I had stopped waiting for my parents' approval. I knew by then that their version of pride had conditions I would never meet. While Ava prepared her essays for college applications, with Mom hovering behind her like a campaign manager, I quietly applied for a partial scholarship to the local community college and a trade program in electrical and HVAC systems. When the acceptance letter arrived, I showed it to my parents at dinner, hopeful for just a flicker of pride. My father barely looked up from his plate. "So, fixing air conditioners and running wires, huh?" he said, chewing. "Well, someone's got to do the sweaty jobs," Mom added. "Just promise you'll keep your hands clean when you visit." They laughed together as if it were a harmless joke, but it wasn't. Every word reinforced what I had already learned. In their eyes, blue collar meant blue shame. While they threw parties to celebrate Ava's acceptance into the UCLA law pipeline, I quietly signed up for evening classes in electrical theory, load calculation, and safety codes. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Ava's celebration took place in our backyard: string lights, catered food, my parents inviting the neighbors to toast to our future lawyer. I still remember holding a plate of half-warm potato salad, listening to everyone tell her how brilliant she was, how she'd make this family proud. When I tried to share my own news that I'd placed first in a regional wiring competition and qualified for the Skills USA Electrical Construction State Finals, Mom smiled absently and said, "That's nice, sweetie, but don't stay up too late working on that stuff. You'll ruin your skin." I laughed politely, but inside, something broke in two. It wasn't jealousy I felt, it was exhaustion. The kind that comes from realizing you could light up the whole city and they'd still complain about the flicker. At trade school, though, the world felt different. My classmates were older men and women who had seen real life up close. Some were single parents, others were veterans rebuilding their futures. They didn't care where I came from or what I wore. What mattered was whether I could strip a wire cleanly, read a circuit diagram, or climb a 12-foot ladder without freezing. I remember the first time I ran conduit across a ceiling grid and the instructor nodded, saying, "Clean work, Hart. You've got steady hands." That one sentence meant more to me than any compliment I'd ever gotten at home. By 19, I was working part-time on a retrofitting project in downtown Los Angeles, replacing old electrical systems in high-rise buildings while finishing my coursework at night. The job was grueling 12-hour shifts, the smell of metal and dust, the constant vibration of jackhammers echoing through unfinished floors. But I loved it. There was something almost poetic about it, taking a dying building and giving it light again. The first paycheck I got was small, but I remember holding it like proof that I existed, proof that my hands, calloused and scarred, could build something tangible. One night, we were finishing a run of conduit along a steel beam on the 21st floor when I noticed a new apprentice, barely 18, reaching for a live wire without checking the breaker. The hum of current hit my ears instantly, a low vibration I'd learned to recognize. I shouted, sprinted across the scaffold, and yanked him back just as the wire sparked, sending a burst of blue light across the room. The foreman rushed over, shouting, "You just saved that kid's life." I didn't know what to say. My hands were shaking, adrenaline surging through me like fire. That night, when we finally clocked out and stood under the orange glow of the streetlights, the foreman clapped my shoulder and said, "You've got instincts, Hart. The kind that make this trade honorable." For the first time, I understood what value really meant, not a GPA printed on a certificate, not a degree framed on the wall, but the kind of worth that comes from being useful when it counts. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone at home anymore. On that scaffold, in the hum of power lines and the smell of ozone, I realized that what they called dirty work was what kept the city alive. Every light in every apartment window was powered by hands like mine. A few weeks later, I returned home for Ava's summer celebration, another one of those family gatherings that felt more like press conferences. She had just completed her first UCLA summer law program, and my parents couldn't stop repeating the phrase, "so proud." When Dad asked me how work was going, I told him about the near accident downtown, about saving a life. He frowned slightly, as if I'd mentioned something mildly inappropriate. "That's dangerous stuff," he said. "Maybe it's time you thought about something safer, something more respectable." I remember looking around the room at the catered food, the guests in their crisp clothes, the polished laughter, and realizing I didn't belong there anymore. But for once, the thought didn't hurt. It felt like clarity. The people in that house had built their world on appearances. I was building mine on substance. That same night, back in my small apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the calluses forming across my palms. My muscles ached, my clothes still smelled faintly of dust and metal, but I'd never felt more alive. I pulled out my old toolbox, the one Grandpa Ray had given me before he passed, and ran my fingers over the initials he'd carved into the handle. C.H. Keep building. I didn't know it yet, but those words would become the blueprint for the rest of my life. Because from that point on, every insult, every dismissal, every moment I was told I wasn't enough, they all became fuel. The more they tried to shame the work I did, the more I realized that real dignity doesn't wear a suit. It wears steel-toed boots, carries a flashlight, and leaves behind the light that others take for granted. By 21, I had officially joined Union Local 11, the same union that had built half of Los Angeles, from the freeways that crisscrossed the valley to the towers that cut through the smog. Getting in wasn't easy. It took months of night classes, hands-on tests, and recommendation letters from journeymen who didn't hand them out lightly. But the day I got my acceptance email, I felt like I'd been given a badge of honor, proof that I belonged to something bigger than myself. My first few months were brutal, 12-hour shifts, rotating job sites, and more calluses than I could count. I learned quickly that construction didn't wait for anyone's comfort. There were nights I worked overtime under halogen lamps on rooftops downtown, the kind of nights where the city looked like an ocean of light and I felt like a ghost moving through it. My dinner was usually instant ramen eaten straight out of my metal toolbox, legs dangling off a scaffold while sparks rained below. I'd lean back, listen to the hum of generators, and think, so this is what independence sounds like. I wasn't rich, but for the first time, I didn't owe anyone anything. Every cent I earned was mine, every hour logged was a step toward the future I was quietly building. A year later, I got assigned to a film studio lot in Burbank, a job that felt surreal at first. The place was a maze of sound stages, each one a miniature world, fake walls hiding 1,000 stories. My team was tasked with rewiring an entire stage that was decades old, the kind of job where one wrong connection could shut down an entire production. I still remember the morning everything went wrong. A storm had hit overnight, and one of the main transformers had blown just as the crew was filming a high-budget car chase scene. Every light, every camera, every prop went black. You could hear the panic ripple through the set. I ran diagnostics with 2 other electricians, following the smell of burned insulation to find the failure point. When we finally located the damaged line, I had to crawl under a platform slick with rainwater, sparks hissing a few inches from my face. My supervisor shouted, "You don't have to do that, Hart." But I was already halfway in, gripping the cable with my gloved hands, heart pounding like a drum. I rerouted the circuit manually and flipped the breaker. The lights flickered, then roared back to life. The entire crew erupted into applause. One of the producers, a woman in a black headset with rain dripping off her nose, came running over, eyes wide. "You just saved us $1 million day," she said, shaking my hand with both of hers. That was the night I stopped apologizing for the work I did. The next morning, she sent an email to my supervisor calling me the most reliable electrician I've ever met. I printed that email and stuck it inside my toolbox, right next to Grandpa's initials. With the money I'd saved from that project and a few smaller gigs, I finally took the leap. I filed the paperwork and registered my own LLC, Salt and Light Electric. The name came from a line Grandpa used to say, "Be the salt that preserves, and the light that guides." It was small at first, just me, a rusted white Ford Transit, and a handful of loyal clients. I took on everything, rewiring old beach houses in Santa Monica, installing backup generators in hospitals, setting up lighting systems for indie film shoots. There were weeks I barely slept, juggling contracts, invoices, and certification courses. I studied the NFPA 70E safety standards religiously, passed my contractor's license exam, and finally earned the right to sign my own jobs. I wasn't just someone else's apprentice anymore. I was the one holding the clipboard, making the calls, leading the crew. But even as my business grew, my family stayed the same. Every phone call home still revolved around Ava. When she landed a clerkship at a small firm, my mother hosted another backyard party. "Our future attorney," she bragged to anyone who'd listen. I stopped by after a long day on site, still wearing my work boots and a neon vest. The moment I stepped through the door, my mother's smile faltered. "Couldn't you have changed first?" she whispered, as if my uniform were an embarrassment. At dinner, Dad asked Ava about her boss, her cases, her bright future. When he finally turned to me, he asked half-heartedly, "So, still doing the electric thing?" I nodded, explaining I'd just signed my first commercial contract, a chain of small boutique hotels in Santa Monica. "Oh," he said, already turning back to Ava, "that's nice, but you should really consider management someday. You don't want to be climbing ladders forever." That was the thing about my parents, they couldn't see the value in anything that wasn't spotless. They worshipped titles, associate, partner, esquire. My work, no matter how vital, was invisible to them. Yet, every time they flipped on a light switch or plugged in a charger, they were touching something built by people like me. I stopped trying to convince them. Instead, I poured myself into the company. Every contract, every client, every project became another brick in the wall separating who I was from who they believed me to be. There were still nights I'd sit on the floor of my apartment, paperwork spread across the table, eating cold pizza while drafting proposals. But even in those moments, surrounded by cables and invoices, I felt grounded. A few years in, Salt and Light Electric started gaining real traction. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. The same studio lot in Burbank hired us again, this time as a preferred vendor. Hospitals started calling for consultations. By then, I had 2 employees and a small rented office. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every flicker of light in that office, every hum of current, felt like a heartbeat proof of something alive, something I'd built out of sweat, wire, and sheer stubbornness. And yet, when I called home, when I said, "Dad, I just finished wiring an entire hotel," all he said was, "That's good, Camille." Anyway, Ava's firm might send her to Washington next year. It should have hurt, but it didn't. Not anymore. Because while they still talked about the daughter who wore suits, I was out here building the city that lit up those suits. Some nights, when I drove home along the Pacific Coast Highway after another long job, I'd pull over and watch the ocean. The streetlights stretched along the shoreline like a string of glowing pearls. Every one of those bulbs had a story, a circuit, a connection, and somewhere, a worker like me behind it. I'd sit there in the driver's seat, salty wind in my hair, and whisper to myself, "You're not the shadow anymore. You're the current." The year I turned 27, everything I had worked for finally began to take shape. Salt and Light Electric wasn't just surviving anymore, it was booming. After years of crawling through dusty ceilings and eating ramen between job sites, I landed my biggest contract yet, a multi-location electrical upgrade for a chain of boutique hotels in Santa Monica. The deal was worth 7 figures, more money than I had ever imagined touching. I remember signing that contract in a cafe across from the pier, the ocean wind pushing through the door each time it opened, carrying the smell of salt and freedom. I didn't celebrate with champagne or fancy dinners. Instead, I drove to a quiet parking lot, sat in my van, and cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, but from the realization that everything they'd once laughed at me for had become the thing that built my life. The project ran for months, a marathon of deadlines and rewiring schedules. Some days, I'd be on site before sunrise, overseeing crews, coordinating with architects, and solving problems no one else could touch. The hotel owner, a calm, sharp-eyed woman named Dana, once told me, "You work like someone who has something to prove." I smiled because she was right. I had everything to prove, not to her, but to the ghosts of every family dinner where I'd been dismissed mid-sentence. By the end of that year, my company's revenue had tripled. Clients started recommending me to one another. One of them, a film director I had met back on the Burbank lot, introduced me to a friend looking to renovate an old property in Malibu. It wasn't just any property, it was a small beach lot on Carbon Beach, tucked between modern glass houses that shimmered in the sunday. The owner, moving overseas, wanted to sell quickly. When I walked the property for the first time, the Pacific stretched endlessly before me, waves crashing like applause. I stood barefoot in the sand, wind whipping through my hair, and felt something powerful click inside me. This was it, my view, my peace, the place I'd promised myself long ago when Mom left me behind for Santa Monica. It wasn't a mansion yet. The original house was small, weathered, with peeling white paint and corroded fixtures, but to me it was a blank canvas. I signed the papers that week, using part of the hotel contract profit as a down payment, and spent every spare hour turning that forgotten shell into a home of light. I rewired every room myself, running copper like veins through the walls, installing recessed LEDs that glowed soft and gold against teak floors. I tore down the old balcony and built a new one with a walnut deck facing the horizon. When I finished wiring the last fixture, a chandelier shaped like waves, I stood in the doorway at sunset and whispered, "Grandpa, I built my view." A few weeks later, I decided to share the news with my family, not to brag, but because part of me still hoped they'd be proud. That weekend, we gathered at my parents' house in Anaheim. The dining table looked exactly the same as it had when I was a kid. Polished oak, holiday candles, and the ever-present sense that I didn't belong at it. Ava sat beside Mom, perfectly composed in her pressed blouse, scrolling through her phone between bites. Dad was at the head of the table, carving roast beef like he was hosting a press event. "So," Mom began, pouring wine for everyone but me. "Ava's firm is assigning her to a new client in Century City. Big promotion." Ava smiled modestly, pretending not to care. The conversation rolled on talk of court cases, vacations, coworkers until Dad finally looked at me. "And how's your electric business going?" he asked, the pause around the word electric almost deliberate. I smiled, deciding to keep it simple. "Actually, really well. We just finished a 7-figure renovation contract for a hotel chain in Santa Monica." Dad chuckled, slicing into his plate. 7 figures? Doing what? Plugging in lamps? Mom laughed softly, as if it were charming. Ava smirked behind her glass. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Full system upgrades. Power distribution, automation, backup circuits. The entire infrastructure." Dad waved his fork dismissively. "Well, whatever it is, good for you. But don't overwork yourself, you'll burn out before you're 30. Just like that, the air left the room. I sat there, my words hanging between us like static that no one cared to clear. I'd just told them something monumental, a milestone that represented years of sweat, exhaustion, and risk, and all I got was a pat on the head. I looked down at my hands, still bearing faint calluses from the job, and thought how strange it was that the same hands that powered entire hotels couldn't seem to light up a single dinner table. They turned the conversation back to Ava's new client, something about a real estate firm and a promising future. I didn't say another word. Instead, I tuned out their voices and watched the candles flicker. The flames bent and swayed, almost as if they were trying to stay alive against the current of indifference in the room. After dinner, I stepped outside, needing air. The streetlights buzzed overhead, that low electric hum that always reminded me of work of life. Standing there, I realized something. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I had built something they couldn't touch, something their approval could neither create nor erase. That night, driving home along the coast, I thought about the little beach house waiting for me. I imagined it glowing in the darkness, the soft golden lights I had installed spilling out onto the sand. My parents thought wiring was small work, something to be pitied. But as I rounded the curve of the highway and saw the Pacific stretching open under the moon, I realized something deeper. They could keep their titles, their fancy dinners, their polished pride. I had built the power that made their world shine. And yet, deep down, there was still that old ache, the quiet wish that one day they might see what I saw. That dignity doesn't come from the title on your door, but from the light you leave behind when you walk out. The beach house became my quiet rebellion, my living proof that what they once called dirty work could create something breathtaking. I started calling it the Salt Lighthouse, half as a joke, half as a promise to myself. It sat right on Carbon Beach, where the Pacific stretched out like a mirror of shifting blue and silver. The front of the house was almost entirely glass, a facade of clarity that opened to the horizon. When the morning sun hit the water, light poured straight through the windows and scattered across the interior like gold dust. The ocean breeze carried the smell of salt through every crack, so that even the walls seemed to breathe. Inside, the floors were made of teak wood, rich and warm under bare feet. I had chosen it for its durability, the kind that deepens in color with time, just like the kind of strength I had learned to build in myself. The kitchen was my favorite room. It had Calacatta marble countertops, their veins swirling like ocean currents, and brushed steel fixtures that caught the light with every movement. The island stretched wide enough for 10 people to sit around, not because I had that many guests yet, but because I liked the idea of building space for those who might one day belong. Beyond the sliding glass doors, a deck of walnut planks led to a fire pit surrounded by low stone walls. I'd light it at dusk, when the air grew cool and the tide whispered below. From there, a set of steps descended straight onto my own strip of sand, untouched by footprints except mine. At night, when the waves crashed and receded, the fire reflected on the water like a heartbeat. It was the perfect contradiction, flame and tide, permanence and motion, all coexisting the way I hoped peace could. The living room was where I allowed myself a bit of poetry. A hand-blown glass chandelier hung from the ceiling, shaped like drops of seawater suspended mid-fall. When the sun hit it, it fractured into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across the white walls. Below it, I placed a sand-colored sofa, a teak coffee table, and a single-framed photo not of family, but of Grandpa Ray, smiling beside his workbench. On the opposite wall, I built a small library, the shelves lined with old manuals and vintage electrical blueprints I'd collected from auctions. To anyone else, they were just diagrams of circuits and load maps. To me, they were art stories of unseen forces that kept the world alive. Every detail of the house carried meaning. The lights were soft and golden, deliberately warm, because I had known too much coldness in my life. The sea air kept a thin layer of salt on the window frames, but I didn't mind. It reminded me that nothing pure ever stays spotless. The walls, the furniture, the glass, everything was imperfect in small ways, human ways. It was nothing like the homes my parents had admired, sterile, symmetrical, museum-like. Mine was alive. Sometimes I would work late into the night, soldering new fixtures or testing dimmers. I installed motion sensors along the stairs, calibrated to glow low amber when someone walked by as if the house itself were welcoming you. I wired hidden speakers into the beams so that when I played music, it resonated softly through the wood. On quiet nights, I'd sit by the fire pit with a mug of coffee, the surf murmuring just beyond the stairs, and feel like the world had finally stopped shouting long enough for me to hear my own thoughts. I never posted any of it online. Not a single photo, not even a hint. When friends asked what I'd been up to, I just said I was working on a personal project. It wasn't secrecy born of fear, it was protection. I wanted this place to exist outside comparison, outside validation, outside the endless need to prove something to people who had never cared to see me. Occasionally, clients or colleagues would ask why I didn't move into the city, closer to the studios or corporate offices. I'd smile and tell them, because my office already has the best lighting. They'd laugh, not realizing I meant it literally. Each morning, when the sun rose and filled the house, I'd walk barefoot through the hallways, trailing my fingers along the walls, feeling the hum of quiet energy that low, invisible current running behind the drywall, the same hum I used to chase in Grandpa's garage when I was a kid, except now, it was mine. The house was everything I'd ever wanted, open, warm, and alive. But more than that, it was symbolic, the exact opposite of every room I'd been excluded from growing up. The dining table wasn't small and polished like my parents' narrow one in Anaheim. It was wide and rough-edged, carved from reclaimed oak, big enough to seat 12. Every chair matched in comfort but not in color, because here, equality didn't mean sameness. The lighting was low and forgiving, golden rather than sterile white, because I wanted faces to look soft, not judged. When I first moved in, I spent the first few nights just listening to the house creak, to the tide move, to the faint hum of the breakers I'd installed. There's something spiritual about electricity when you understand it. It's both silent and alive, invisible yet essential. I thought about all the people who had called my work blue-collar, said it smelled of sweat, said it wasn't respectable. Then I'd look at my house glowing gently against the dark Pacific and think, tell me again how light isn't worth respect. Sometimes, standing on the deck at sunset, I'd see the faint shimmer of nearby mansions, glass palaces that looked colder than marble. I knew people assumed anyone who lived here must have come from money, must have been born into privilege. The irony made me smile. Because this house, my house, had been built by a woman who once ate ramen from a toolbox, whose mother had said her job was too sweaty for company. Now, the salt air carried no shame. The waves no longer felt like the sound of something unreachable, but like applause. The fire pit crackled each night as if celebrating survival. And as I stood there watching the last of the daylight fade into the water, I felt something I had never felt in my parents' house: belonging. Not to them, not to anyone else's expectations, but to the life I had built with my own 2 hands. Still, I told no one in my family about the beach house. I didn't post, didn't boast, didn't even hint. Let them think I was still the electrician, too rough for their table. Because someday, when the truth surfaced, I wanted it to speak for itself, not with noise, but with light. It was early December when the first message came through, short, clipped, and predictable. Mom wrote, "This year will be small, Just Ava and her boyfriend. We're keeping it intimate. She added a smiley face at the end, as if that softened the sting. I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring against the screen, my reflection faintly visible behind them. Just Ava and her boyfriend. No mention of me. No question about my plans. Just a quiet reminder that, once again, I wasn't part of their version of family. At first, I told myself I shouldn't care. I had my own life, my own home, my own table. But the silence that followed hurt more than I expected. It wasn't just exclusion, it was the ease with which they did it. Like brushing off a speck of dust. I needed to know if it was just me, or if they'd cut everyone else too. That evening, I called Aunt Linda, Mom's older sister. She lived in Pasadena and had always been kind to me, the kind of aunt who remembered birthdays even when my parents didn't. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart," she said warmly. "Haven't heard your voice in a while." I hesitated. "Did you get Mom's Christmas invite this year?" There was a pause on the other end, the faint sound of her shifting in her chair. "No, actually. She sent a group text saying they wanted to keep it just immediate family this year. I guess that means Ava and, what's his name? Lucas," I said quietly. "Right, the new boyfriend. Your mom made it sound like a big debut or something." "Why?" "Just checking," I murmured. I wasn't invited either. Her sigh carried more understanding than pity. "Camille, I'm sorry, you don't deserve that." After I hung up, I called Uncle Jim, my father's brother, who lived up north in Monterey. His voice crackled over the line, gruff but kind. "No invite here either, kiddo," he said. "Your old man said it'd be a quiet one." "Guess they mean quiet as in empty." He laughed dryly. "Even your grandma didn't make the cut." I froze. "Grandma Helen? She's not invited?" "Nope, said they wanted to give Ava her moment." Your grandma was furious. Told me, and I quote, "If Christmas is only for show, it's not Christmas anymore." Ah. I hung up and stared out through the glass wall of the living room. Outside, the Pacific was calm, a long sheet of steel under the fading Sunday. I thought about Grandma sitting alone in her small apartment in Orange County, the same woman who'd taught me to braid copper wire when I was 12, who once said, "You'll make your own light someday." She was the reason I still believed in warmth, even after everything. And now, even she'd been shut out all for Ava's boyfriend's comfort. Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was clarity, maybe both. For years, I had let them define family who deserved a seat, who didn't, but now I had a table of my own. Literally. A table of reclaimed oak sitting in my dining room, big enough to seat everyone they'd ever ignored. I picked up my phone again and started typing. December 24th. Malibu. My place. Bring whoever you want. No gifts needed, I'll take care of everything. No. At first, I sent it only to Aunt Linda and Grandma Helen. Within minutes, both replied. "Aunt Linda. You serious? You have a place in Malibu?" "Grandma. Tell me what to bring, I'll start baking tonight." I smiled. The hum of the ocean outside sounded almost like applause. Then I began scrolling through my contacts, one name after another: Uncle Jim, Cousin Rachel and her kids. Eli from Chicago, who hadn't visited in years because he couldn't stand Mom's favoritism, Aunt Marianne, who used to slip me $20 bills for gas when I was broke. Then, almost impulsively, I added a few more. Mr. Dawson, my retired shop teacher who once told me, "You've got the kind of grit they can't teach at law school." Mr. Alvarez, the carpenter who'd taught me how to use a nail gun without flinching. And Linda, my next-door neighbor, widowed, soft-spoken, and always leaving muffins at my doorstep for company. I hit send all. Over the next 24 hours, the replies began flooding in. Eli called first. "You mean it?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. "A Christmas without the perfect family act?" "Exactly," I said. "Just people who actually want to be there." He laughed. "Count me in. I'll bring the guitar." Then came Aunt Marianne's message. "You don't know what this means, Camille. It's been years since someone in this family reached out without conditions. Even Grandma texted again, adding, "If your parents show up after the fact, don't let them ruin it. This one's yours." By the next evening, I had a list of nearly 20 people, family members, neighbors, old mentors, people who had drifted away because they were tired of walking on eggshells. Every new name felt like a small victory, a spark against years of silence. I pulled out a notebook and began sketching plans: the menu, decorations, sleeping arrangements. I didn't just want to host a dinner. I wanted to build an experience, one that felt nothing like the polished, staged gatherings of my childhood. This Christmas would be messy, real, loud, and warm. Standing in the middle of the Salt Lighthouse, I imagined it filled with laughter and conversation. No kids' table, no fake toasts about success, no measuring who'd achieved more. Just people sitting shoulder to shoulder, holding mugs of cider, watching the fire reflect on the waves. The air in the house seemed to hum, the same way it did right before a circuit closed and current began to flow. And as I looked around, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just about proving a point. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be invited in. I was opening the door. In the days that followed, the quiet Malibu mornings became the heartbeat of my preparation. The Pacific was calm most days, the water glinting like liquid glass, and every sunrise felt like a clean start. I woke early, walked barefoot across the deck, and made lists: food, seating, music, lighting, all scribbled in the same thick-covered notebook that had once held my job blueprints. But this wasn't another construction project. It was something far more fragile and deliberate, an act of rebuilding something I had never truly had. A family table that belonged to everyone. I decided I wouldn't cook alone. I wanted this to feel alive, communal, celebratory. So I called Chef Marisol, a woman I'd met on a hotel renovation project in Santa Monica years before. She was half Mexican, half SoCal coastal, soul, sharp humor, salt in her voice, warmth in her eyes. When she answered, I barely got 2 words out before she interrupted with a laugh. "Let me guess, you're finally hosting?" "You could say that," I replied. "Christmas Eve. Malibu. I want something honest, no show plates, no soufflé towers, just food that feels like sunlight and sea air." "How so?" "Then we'll make it coastal," she said. Citrus ceviche with blood orange, lobster rolls with butter on toasted brioche, roasted prime rib with sea salt crust, and for dessert, key lime pie with vanilla bean cream. "Perfect," I said, feeling my chest loosen. "I'll pay whatever you need." She laughed again. "You'll pay me in good company. The rest's on me." While Marisol planned the menu, I began shaping the house into something that reflected what this night meant. I didn't want the artificial glitter my parents loved, no metallic garlands or plastic reindeer. Instead, I built the decor from the world right outside my window. I spent mornings combing the shoreline, collecting smooth shells and driftwood, rinsing each one in salt water before laying them out to dry in the sunday. From the local nursery, I bought olive branches and eucalyptus leaves, their silvery green hues soft and understated. By the time I was done, the lodge looked like it had grown straight out of the sand. Wreaths of olive leaves and shells hung around the door frames, intertwined with thin gold threads. On each table surface, I placed small vanilla and sea salt candles, their fragrance drifting gently through the hall, like the scent of the ocean itself breathing through the house. Above the main doorway, I hung a wooden sign I carved myself, the letters burned into the grain. "Everyone has a seat." That. I ran my fingers over the words when I finished. For years, there had been a table that didn't have space for me. Now I had built one big enough for everyone who'd ever stood outside that door. When the house began to take shape, I turned to the details, not the kind that impress, but the kind that make people feel remembered. I bought cashmere scarves in soft pearl gray, one for Grandma Helen, and paired it with a box of dried chamomile tea from a small apothecary in Ojai. I tied the set with twine and a handwritten card. "For warmth that doesn't fade with the season. For Mr. Alvarez, The carpenter who'd taught me precision long before I could afford tools. I found a set of vintage wood carving chisels from a collector in Ventura, each handle engraved with a faint floral pattern. I wrapped them in linen and wrote, "For the hands that taught me how to build." For the kids, my cousin Rachel's twins and Aunt Marianne's grandniece, I ordered Lego coastal rescue sets, complete with lifeboats, dolphins, and lighthouses. I imagined their small hands fitting pieces together as laughter filled the deck. For the first time, there would be no kids' table. Everyone, regardless of age or title, would sit side by side. That was the rule. Setting up the deck took nearly 2 days. The wood gleamed after I sanded and resealed it, and as the afternoon light stretched long across Carbon Beach, I measured the exact placement for the dining table I'd designed, one long line of reclaimed oak running parallel to the sea. 12 feet of wood, smooth yet full of natural imperfections, flanked by woven rattan chairs that creaked gently when you Saturday. Above, strings of golden Edison bulbs hung in lazy arcs, swaying slightly in the ocean wind. When the light began to fade, the deck transformed. The fire pit glowed low and steady, the waves whispered below the steps, and I could almost picture it, the sound of conversation, the smell of roasted citrus, the rhythm of shared laughter echoing off the water. I worked until my hands ached, polishing, hanging, testing, adjusting. Marisol arrived every morning with her team, her laughter spilling through the kitchen as she marinated shrimp and sliced bright limes. "This house cooks easy," she said one afternoon, wiping her hands on her apron. "It feels like it was built to feed people." I smiled. It was. The final touches came on December 23rd. I spent the afternoon arranging place cards, handwritten on thick cream paper. No titles, no last names, no hierarchies, just Linda, Eli, Marianne, Grandma Helen, Mr. Alvarez, Rachel, and so on. Each seat equal. As dusk fell, I stood at the edge of the deck, the ocean breeze tangling my hair, and lit the candles one by one. Their flames flickered, gold against the deepening blue of the sea. Behind me, through the glass, the house shimmered softly, shells catching light, the chandelier glowing like trapped sunlight. For a long time, I just stood there listening to the sea. The same waves that once sounded like distance now sounded like home. It struck me then, this wasn't a revenge dinner. It was a reclamation. Every dish, every wreath, every candle was a small act of healing, of saying we matter, too. And when I stepped back inside, the warm air hitting my skin, I whispered the words carved above the door, letting them ring true in my chest. Everyone has a seat. Tomorrow, the house would fill with the kind of laughter I'd waited my whole life to hear. But tonight, the silence before it all felt like peace. By the time the sun began to dip behind the horizon on Christmas Eve, the Salt Light house no longer felt like mine alone. The ocean breeze carried the scent of roasted citrus and wood smoke through the open doors, mingling with faint notes of vanilla and sea salt from the candles I'd lit earlier. The long oak table on the deck was set, plates gleaming in the firelight, glasses lined like quiet promises waiting to be raised. And then, from the distance, came the soft sound of tires crunching against sand and gravel. One by one, headlights appeared along the curve of the coastal road, until the driveway filled with warm laughter and the shuffle of feet climbing the steps. The first to arrive was Aunt Linda, her scarf fluttering in the wind. "Camille," she called, her voice bright and almost trembling. "You really did all this?" I smiled and hugged her tightly. "Welcome home." Behind her came Rachel and her twins, the children squealing as they caught sight of the glittering tree inside through the glass walls. Then Uncle Jim stepped out of his truck, carrying a small cooler that clinked faintly with bottles. "Figured the ocean needed a proper toast," he said, his grin wide. The air soon filled with movement and laughter, the kind that comes when people feel safe to be themselves again. Guests trailed sand onto the deck without apology, brushed sea wind from their hair, and marveled at the ocean spread open before them. I had left the sliding doors wide, so the sound of the waves rolled in like background music. Near the kitchen, Chef Marisol and her team moved effortlessly, plating lobster rolls, arranging bowls of ceviche with orange slices glowing like stained glass, and basting the prime rib with melted butter that caught the candlelight in a soft shimmer. From the far corner of the deck, a young violinist began to play a soft acoustic version of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," each note rising and falling like a wave, the melody warm and human against the cold sea air. When everyone had gathered, about 20 of us in all, I stood at the head of the table, my hands lightly resting on the wood I'd sanded just days before. The conversations dimmed, the violin lingered in one last note, and I said only 4 words. "Thank you for coming." No speech, no ceremony, no mention of who wasn't there. Just those 4 words. And yet, as I looked around at the faces glowing golden in the firelight, at Grandma Helen sitting near the middle, her hands folded on the tablecloth, I realized I didn't need to say more. Everyone here understood. Dinner began with laughter that seemed to stretch as wide as the sea. Plates clinked, glasses touched. The smell of grilled butter and lime filled the air. I caught sight of Mr. Alvarez, the retired carpenter, holding his new set of vintage chisels like they were sacred artifacts. "You didn't have to," he said softly. "But I'm glad you did." He wasn't one for long words, and that single line was enough. At the far end of the table, the children tore into their Lego rescue sets, piecing together lifeboats and towers, the small plastic waves mirroring the real ones just a few yards away. Rachel leaned across the table, raising her glass toward me. "You know what's crazy?" she said. "This feels like the first real Christmas our family's had in decades." That was when Grandma reached over. Her hand, still warm and steady despite the years, rested gently over mine. The golden light flickered across the deep lines of her face, and for a long moment she didn't speak. Then, in her quiet, unwavering voice, she said the words that would stay with me for the rest of my life. "You've given us a real Christmas. Not a perfect one, not one built on photo backdrops or polite applause, but a real one. Messy, human, loud, and alive." My throat tightened, and for a second, I couldn't reply. I just squeezed her hand back and nodded, afraid that if I opened my mouth, the tears behind my ribs would spill out like a tide. Later in the evening, the sky deepened into violet and silver. The Pacific shimmered with streaks of moonlight, the waves glowing faintly as if the stars themselves were trapped beneath them. I stepped away from the table for a moment, leaning against the deck railing. Behind me, Marisol's laughter rang from the kitchen, Uncle Jim's deep voice told an old fishing story, and the violinist had switched to a slow waltz that made the flames in the fire pit sway like dancers. It was then that Rachel came to stand beside me, holding her phone up to capture the scene. "You don't mind if I record this, do you?" I shook my head. "Go ahead, just make sure to get the sunset in there." End quote. She filmed quietly, the children laughing over their half-built Lego towers, the adults raising glasses against the orange glow of dusk, the light reflecting off the ocean like spilled silver. Her video was only 20 seconds long, but it captured everything that mattered. By the time dessert came, key lime pie with vanilla cream and toasted coconut, the house felt alive in a way I had never known. The air smelled of citrus and sugar and salt. Someone began clapping after Grandma's toast. Someone else pulled out a phone to record the violinist. I didn't stop them. I wanted these moments to live beyond the night, to become proof that this had really happened, that warmth could be rebuilt from ashes. After dinner, a few people moved inside. The kids gathered in the library, puzzling over the old electrical blueprints, while Mr. Alvarez told them how houses carry energy the way people carry memories. Aunt Linda and Marisol poured wine by the fire pit, the flames painting their faces gold. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted and full, the ocean whispering in the background. Then the notifications began. Little dings and vibrations from everyone's phones, Instagram stories, Facebook reels, family group chats, lighting up. Rachel's short clip was already spreading among relatives, captioned simply, "Christmas at Camille's, we found our way home." Another cousin posted a panoramic shot of the long table against the sea, the caption reading, "No kids' table this year. Everyone belongs." Someone else uploaded a video of Grandma's laugh, a deep, genuine sound that had been missing for years, and tagged it #Salt Lake Christmas. I didn't post anything myself. I just watched as the notifications rippled through, like waves returning to shore. For once, the story of this family wasn't being written by the ones who excluded, it was being rewritten by those who showed up. I looked out again at the horizon, the sea shimmering silver under the moon, the laughter still floating behind me, and thought of the message my mother had sent weeks earlier. Keeping it intimate. I smiled to myself. She was right, I thought. It was intimate. Just not the way she meant. The night stretched on. The music slowed, the fire burned low, and the guests began to drift into quiet conversation. When Grandma finally stood to leave, she hugged me long and tight, her voice barely a whisper against my shoulder. "You didn't wait for them to open a door," she said. "You built your own." As her car lights disappeared down the coastal road, I turned back to the deck, still glowing softly under the last string of bulbs. The sea was calm again, the stars steady. For the first time in my life, Christmas didn't hurt, it healed. The morning after Christmas dawned slow and silver. The Pacific shimmered like glass outside my window, the air still heavy with salt and smoke from the fire pit. Inside, the house smelled faintly of citrus, vanilla, and warmth, the kind of smell that lingers after joy. I walked barefoot through the great room, the deck doors still cracked open, the remains of last night's laughter echoing in the corners like distant music. Half-empty glasses, the imprint of hands on the oak table, the faint hum of the fridge, proof that something real had happened here. Then my phone began to vibrate. Once. Then again. Then over and over. The screen lit up with names I hadn't seen in weeks. Mom, Dad, Ava. 10 missed calls in less than 5 minutes. Then a message preview slid across the top of the screen. Ava. Really cheap move, Camille. Enjoy your little show. The words sliced through the quiet like static. Cheap move. Enjoy your little show. I almost laughed, it was so predictable, so perfectly rehearsed in their tone. I stood for a moment, staring out at the calm blue horizon, and then walked toward the fireplace where Grandma Helen was sitting with her morning tea. She looked up, her eyes soft but sharp, the way only someone who's seen too many winters can look. "They've started, haven't they?" she asked. I nodded. "Do you want to hear it?" She set her cup down. "Turn it on, sweetheart. Let's not hide from ghosts anymore." I pressed the speaker phone button. Mom's voice burst out immediately, tight and clipped, the tone of someone trying to control the story before it gets away from them. "Camille, do you realize what you've done? The entire family chat is buzzing about your little Malibu spectacle. Even Pastor mentioned it during the service this morning. You've made us look ridiculous." I stayed quiet, letting her words spill like water hitting rock. She went on, voice rising. "You couldn't just let your sister have one simple Christmas to introduce her boyfriend? You had to turn it into some charity dinner with half the extended family? People are asking why we weren't there. Do you know how that makes us look?" Her anger was so familiar it almost sounded like background noise, like the hum of the power lines I used to work beneath. I waited until she paused to catch her breath, and then said, calm and clear, "I only did exactly what you told me to do, Mom." A beat of silence. "What are you talking about? You said this year would be small, just Ava and her boyfriend, so I kept it small too, just the people you'd forgotten." For a moment, there was only the sound of the ocean outside. Then came Dad's voice, lower, trying to sound authoritative. "Camille, that's not the point. You embarrassed us. Everyone's talking about this, saying we've lost control of the family narrative." "The family narrative?" I repeated, my voice almost trembling from disbelief. "Dad, I hosted a dinner. I didn't write a scandal. The only thing I lost control of was caring what you think." Mom snapped. "Don't take that tone with us. You know exactly what you were doing showing off that house." "That house," I said softly, "was built with the same hands you once called dirty. The same hands you told not to smell like metal grease before family photos. The same hands that kept the lights on in the city when the power went out. You should be proud of that house." Before either of them could speak, Grandma Helen's voice cut through the room like the steady crack of a switch being thrown. Calm, unwavering, but sharp enough to slice through steel. "That's enough, Judy. Robert. The line went silent. You've spent years ashamed of this child's work, she said, her tone low but firm. Ashamed of the sweat that built her success. Do you remember, Judy, when Camille was 15 and you made her wash her hands twice before dinner because they smelled of copper from the garage? Do you remember, Robert, when you laughed at her uniform and said, "You'll never find love with dirt under your nails"? Well, that dirt built homes, it powered streets, it lit hospitals. It brought warmth to families while you bragged about your other daughter's law internships. Her words came slow, deliberate, like hammer strikes on an anvil. You talk about being embarrassed? You should be embarrassed that you only learned to see worth when it wore a suit. Camille's work keeps your heaters running, your lights burning, your comfort intact, yet you call it blue collar as if that's an insult. Let me tell you something, there's more honor in those hands than in any title on a Christmas card. I stood frozen, breath caught in my throat. The sound of her voice filled the room with a gravity I'd never heard before. On the other end of the line, I heard my father exhale shakily. Mother, that's not fair. She didn't let him finish. Fair? You've built your whole life around unfair. Around one perfect daughter and one invisible one. Around pretending class is character. Well, I sat at Camille's table last night, and I saw something. You never built a family that laughs together without fear. A real one. There was nothing after that but silence. Not the angry kind, but the hollow kind, the sound of pride cracking for the first time. Then Mom's voice returned, smaller, faltering. I didn't mean, I just thought. Grandma didn't raise her voice, but her next words were final. You thought wrong, you always have. Lo. I took a slow breath, my fingers resting lightly on the phone. Mom, Dad. I said softly. At my table, everyone has a seat, even you. But only if you're ready to listen, not lecture. No one replied. I waited 3 beats, then reached over and ended the call. The silence afterward felt like fresh air. Grandma looked up at me, her expression calm. You handled that well, she said quietly. I didn't, I replied. You did. She smiled faintly. No, darling. You built the house. I just helped flip the switch. Outside, the ocean roared softly, steady and unbothered, the sound of a world too vast to be shaken by small voices. I sat beside her, the fire still warm from the night before, and realized that for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt grounded, like a current finally closed, the circuit complete. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a seat at their table. But now, the truth glowed quietly between the flames and the sea. I had built my own. A week later, the ocean had quieted again. The guests were gone, the laughter faded, and the Saltlight House had returned to stillness, that deep, steady kind of silence that feels like healing. For days, I thought about what Grandma had said after the phone call, about circuits completing and lights turning on. I had already built my table, but some part of me knew the story wasn't done. There were still people standing outside the door, people I couldn't forget, no matter how much I wanted to. So I sent one last message. Dinner, December 31st, Malibu, just family. I didn't decorate. I didn't hire Marisol or light the fire pit. There was no music, no glittering lights, no long table set for 20. Just a small spread. Grilled sea bass, mango salad, and a bottle of Santa Barbara Chardonnay resting in a silver bucket that caught the flicker of candlelight. The wind carried the faint hum of waves against the sand, and inside the dining room, the only light came from the candles lined along the teak table. When the knock came, I hesitated for a moment before opening the door. My parents stood there, both a little uncertain, as if unsure how to hold their faces. Ava stood slightly behind them, her hand in her boyfriend's. I hadn't met him before, tall, quiet, dressed neatly but without pretense. Come in, I said simply. They stepped inside, the scent of salt and citrus drifting around us. No one spoke for a long while. My father commented softly, "Beautiful place." My mother nodded, adding, "Different from what I imagined." I gestured toward the table. "Sit, the food's getting cold." We ate in silence for several minutes, the sound of the ocean breaking the tension. Then I set my fork down and said the words that had sat inside me for years. I'm not doing this to fight. I just want to say things that were never said. They both looked up. Ava's eyes flickered between us, uncertain. I took a slow breath. There were Christmases when you forgot me. Birthdays when the only thing I got was a gift card while Ava unwrapped jewelry. You called my job dirty work. You told me not to wear my uniform to family photos because it made us look too common. Once, you literally pushed me out of the frame. Mom's eyes lowered. Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I spent years thinking if I worked harder, earned more, bought something impressive enough, you'd finally see me. But you never did, until now when everyone else did first. The words came slower after that, quieter. You know what hurts most? It's not the times you left me out, it's how easy it was for you. No one moved. Then, after what felt like forever, my father spoke, his voice small, almost fragile. I didn't realize how deep it went. I thought you were strong enough that you didn't need all that. I guess I was wrong. Mom's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. I didn't mean to shame you, Camille. I was just scared of what people would think if you didn't fit the image. Of what image? I asked gently. The one we built, she whispered. The one that made us feel safe. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ava shifted in her seat, clearing her throat softly. Can I say something? I nodded. Her voice trembled slightly. I didn't tell you before, but Lucas's dad is a plumber. He owns a small repair company in Fresno. When I told Mom and Dad, she stopped, looking down at her hands. I was afraid they'd look at him the way they looked at you. Lucas reached for her hand. My dad worked with his hands his whole life, he said quietly. Taught me everything I know about fixing things. There's nothing to be ashamed of. That. Ava nodded, tears finally slipping down her cheek. I know that now. I think I was jealous, Camille. You got to be yourself, you never tried to hide it. I spent years pretending not to be me. The room softened. The air between us didn't feel like glass anymore, fragile and breakable. It felt heavy, but real. I didn't rush to forgive them. The truth was too new, too raw. But I could see something changing in their faces, not perfection, not redemption, just the quiet, awkward honesty of people finally seeing the damage they'd done. That was enough for now. When the plates were cleared, I stood and walked toward the deck. The night air was cool, the ocean humming softly in the dark. I pulled out 2 empty chairs and turned back to them. This table, I said, is always open, but only for people who know how to respect it. No one answered, but I didn't need them to. The sound of the waves filled the silence. After a while, Dad stood and followed me out. He placed a hand on the back of one of the chairs, not sitting, just standing there, and said quietly, "We'll try to earn it." That was enough. We said goodbye at the door. No big embrace, no cinematic apology. Just a few quiet nods, a little more eye contact than before, and a sense that something unfinished had finally begun to mend. After they left, I stood alone on the deck, watching the moonlight spread over the Pacific like silver paint. The waves rolled in slow, steady rhythm, and somewhere far below, the tide hissed against the sand, erasing footprints, smoothing everything clean. I took a deep breath, the salt air filling my lungs, and whispered the truth that had taken me 30 years to learn. You don't need anyone to hand you a place at their table. You can build your own plank by plank, mistake by mistake, light by light. And if you've ever been made to feel small because of the work you do, if someone told you your job was too blue-collar, too sweaty, too ordinary, I hope you remember this. Your worth isn't defined by the collar around your neck, but by the hands that keep the city's lights burning. The sea and the light will always remind you belong. So tell me, where are you listening from? Because no matter how far you are, if you've ever felt unseen, there's already a seat for you here at this table, by the water, under the golden glow of the lights you built yourself.